morning and welcome to the Power of 10 forum series hosted by Cumberland Region Tomorrow. Before we begin, let's take a look at your dashboard and its features. On the right side of your screen, you will find the chat and Q&A tabs. Near the end of the broadcast, we will have our panelists answering questions submitted during the show. If you have an interest in a question already entered, click the upvote button. That will make it rise in priority. You can view the broadcast in full screen mode by closing the chat and the Q&A by clicking in the down arrow in the upper right-hand corner of each feature. You can reopen them if you elect to use them later in the broadcast by clicking the chat icon, and it will open other features. Now that you understand how the platform works, let's begin. Again, I'd like to say thanks and welcome on behalf of Cumberland Region Tomorrow. We're very excited about continuing the discussions that were started at our Power of 10 this year. Last week, Gary Hawkins hosted a discussion on parks and open space. Obviously, those are very crucial elements in the future growth of our community here in Middle Tennessee. And speaking of open space, I would invite you to go to our website and check out a report and document that we did recently on farmlands and open space. It's very telling about the value that we can find in those resources. Also, while you're at our website, feel free to go to the bottom and click on the eBlast sign up so that you can get latest information from Cumberland Region Tomorrow. This week, we're hosting a conversation about the built environment and what steps can be taken to make the places that we develop as special as they can be. During the Power of 10, our featured speaker, Brett Toderon, emphasized the importance of our design, not putting so much emphasis on the automobile and getting the car around, but instead creating places designed to allow people, one, to accomplish multiple goals in the same location without having to travel, but then if they do have to travel, giving them opportunities other than the automobile to travel, such as bike and walking. And in order to do that, what we have to do is design infrastructure around those new land uses in order to support safe and reliable transportation other than the automobile. And the beauty of that is ultimately we want to reduce the impact on our car transportation system. And if we can reduce the number of car trips, that helps in that process. While our cities do develop long-range land use plans that work toward this type of community, from a design perspective, an easier way to accomplish that sometimes is in the large-scale mixed-use communities. Those developments are obviously very challenging to do and require a special skill set. Luckily, today we are joined by a panel of developers and a local planner who are working in this environment right now and tackling these big issues. Not to be too presumptuous about the panelists today, but I am pretty sure based on the projects that they're working on, that there is a lot of wisdom that we can glean from them, and also from Jeff at Clarksville, Montgomery County, on ways to deal with the various aspects of new development growth patterns. For today's discussion, I'd like to give each panelist time to provide an introduction of their project and hit briefly on things that they have seen along the way as it relates to design, review, and approval process. After each panelist has spoken, I'd like to host a conversation among the guests and touch on a few of the very hot topic items or ones that seem to continue to come up in the review and design approval. At the end, we'll leave, as I mentioned before, at the end of this, we'll leave time for questions that you submit on the chat box. The goal is really to conclude today's conversation with a few takeaways that we can work on to make the planning and development process even easier and better as we go to make great places. And before we start the discussion, we'll take a few minutes to recognize our sponsors for today's event and for our general sponsors for Cumberland Region Tomorrow and the Power of 10. As you can see here, these are our vital lifeblood and the group that has helped us sustain the work that we've done here at Cumberland Region Tomorrow. And we're really excited and pleased to have them as a continued sponsor. For today's event, we have very special guests. I'm really excited to highlight these two teams. I selected them specifically because they do work with all the panelists that we have today. Plus, I've done work with them, and I've been able to recognize firsthand the power of having their knowledge and skill set at the table to implement the kind of projects that we're going to talk about today. The first group I want to highlight is Reagan Smith. Reagan Smith has worked with many clients in the region over the years to create vibrant mixed-use communities. I know firsthand the strength of having them on my team. They understand the many variables that go into a successful site design, from stormwater and grading to the needs of specific building types like retail, office, and multifamily. They recognize the importance of delivering quality design for the future of our community and feel a real pride in the work that they do towards this goal. The next group that we have today sponsoring today's conversation is Smith G Studios. Along with our first speaker, leadership of Smith G Studios served as pioneers in the realm of mixed use for Middle Tennessee as they worked on a master plan project at the time called Project X, which later became The Gulch. Along with their work with Market Street, Smith G Studios has worked with each of our panelists in the development of various communities and product types across the spectrum, from residential to office to multifamily. Smith G is uniquely suited because of the team that they have built over the years and the specialties they have within the team, from large scale land planning all the way to single family residential. They really do have a strong team that provides a variety of skill sets and expertise with them. So without further ado, let's get to our speakers. Dirk Melton with Market Street will be up first. Dirk is responsible for the firm's real estate and investment and development activities at Market Street, which includes the management of the commercial, residential, retail, and mixed-use portfolio that they have. Market Street has served, as I mentioned earlier, as a pioneer in the realm of large-scale mixed use for downtown Nashville. The Gulch has served itself in many ways for us to analyze and review good planning practices and effectively delivering a mixed-use community. The Gulch was the first community to win the LEED ND neighborhood in the South. Market Street continues to push this idea and work throughout Middle Tennessee. Dirk?
Well, thank you very much, Scott, for that introduction. And thank you, Shelley, for inviting me to participate with this group today. Really excited to be here. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope we'll generate some good conversations and some questions from the audience when we're done with our remarks. Thanks also to our sponsors. Our firm has been and is currently working with both Reagan Smith and Smith G Studio on current projects. Fantastic group of folks, and I really appreciate their participation with us today. So I've got some brief remarks. Scott, I think you asked me to keep those to 45 minutes. It won't take that long, but I'm going to go with a couple things here to get us started, and hopefully the audience will find this to be interesting. So I think we've got an intro video, kind of a day in the life of the Gulch, and then I'm going to pick up with some additional remarks. So we like to joke that our Gulch people, the models we used in that video, they spend a lot more time shopping and working out and eating and drinking than they do working, apparently. So, but it's kind of fun. It kind of gives you a flavor for some of the various retail and restaurant offerings that we have available for people to enjoy in the neighborhood. On the next slide, just kind of give some of you a geographical orientation for where the Gulch is and how big it is. It's about 60 acres in size. It's bordered to the north by Broadway, and then on the east and west by the CSX railroad tracks and the inner loop, the west side of the inner loop, I-65, I-40, and then 8th Avenue South. About in August of last year, we celebrated our company's 20th anniversary of our first land acquisition that Steve Turner bought in the Gulch back in August of 1999. And since then, we've been really busy. Of course, it didn't always look like it looks today. In the next slide, you'll see some historical photos of what the real estate looked like with Steve Steve's initial purchase. Looks like a tremendous real estate investment opportunity, doesn't it? It's something that the Gulch used to be a place that you would drive through and not to, as evidenced by the bottom right-hand slide, which is a historical photo from 11th Avenue Industrial Boulevard, which is now 11th Avenue South. It has a different shape and size than it used to. We've been really busy since then. On the next slide, you'll see some other examples of some of the things that we and other companies have been doing over the past 20 years. I think the Gulch has really turned into kind of a case study for smart growth and infill areas for cities our size. To date, we and other developers have invested over $1 billion in the neighborhood, including our friends at Bristol Development with Scott's firm and a bunch of others. Currently, there are 12 active projects underway in the neighborhood, totaling about $870 million worth of investments from both in-town and out-of-town developers. And so we just continue really to, expand the offerings that we have here. The next slide gives some reference to some of the things that are available. Shameless plug, we just opened a new pocket park in the Gulch, Noble Park, last weekend that's now available to the public, and it's adjacent to the new Lululemon store that we just opened on Friday. So lots of exciting things happening in the neighborhood. Based on a 20-year history of the Gulch, we're about halfway done with that project by density and by what's available to us for entitlements in our master plan. We'll continue to season those sites and provide new buildings and amenities for the neighborhood over time. But we also were cognizant of the fact that Nashville's growing in a big way, really more than it ever has. The trajectory that we've been on as a city since the Great Recession about 10 years ago has been really tremendous, and we expect that to continue. Just for frame of reference, our population as a metro area right now is about the same thing, about the same size as Metro Atlanta was back in 1986. And so, there's, reports and studies you can read about, how we're going to add 1 million people to this market in the next 20 years. We need to figure out where those folks want to go. And we've been very intentional about trying to scope out other areas of town that we think maybe have the potential for growth. We've been going south. So on the next slide, you'll see an introduction for our next development that we hope to bring to the market here very shortly, called East Works District in the Cool Springs submarket of the city of Franklin. The next slide will depict where that's at. It's interesting that this site is a 50-acre site. It's sandwiched in between Interstate 65 and Carruthers Parkway, roughly halfway in between Bakers Bridge Road and Cool Springs Boulevard to the north and south. We're finding that as Metro Nashville develops, that the reverse commute heading down 65 from Davidson County and points north to get to Cool Springs and the employment centers that are there is almost as much as the regular commute coming up 65 from the south. And so we think that over time, Nashville will be embracing and endorsing successful edge cities like other cities our size have done over the past 20 to 30 years. And we think that the city of Franklin and Cool Springs in particular is a great opportunity to try to leverage that growth and provide opportunities and amenities for people that want to be closer to where they work and where they live. The next slide depicts the physical condition that we have now. Our friends at Reagan Smith call this the fried egg. This is the development pattern from the 1980s and 1990s. This is Ford Motor Credit's headquarters that was built, actually the first and still the largest Class A office building in the Cool Springs submarket, which opened in 1995. So here we are, many years later, looking at our development patterns and saying, it might not be necessary to have 2,344 surface parking spaces around this 500,000 square foot building utilizing 50 whole acres. So we've got an idea for something different. The next slide shows what that might turn into over time. So this is the master plan that we received approval from the city of Franklin last month, as a matter of fact. We received tremendous support from Alderman Bev Berger, who's the Ward 1 alderperson for this area, the planning department, engineering, all the way up and down the city administration. They were really great with helping us get through the entitlement process for something that's never been done in Franklin before. The next slide depicts some kind of lifestyle images of kind of what we hope this will turn into over time. The key thing here for us is that we really want to try to provide a diverse, walkable, and highly amenitized environment that reminds people of some characteristics of a more, quote unquote urban experience, but without the hassles of traffic and paying for parking and things like that you experience sometimes in the downtown area. And so it really has been a pretty cool experience to go through this process. The next couple slides depict just some of the character images that we hope to, create some of the buildings that were here. Total density for this project, as entitled, includes about 500,000 square foot of additional office space, about 1,600 residential units, the opportunity for up to 3 hotels, all supported by a ground floor restaurant, shops and service retail that will be supporting the development. And so we're awfully excited to bring this to market. We were the first major redevelopment to come in under the new zoning ordinance for the city of Franklin that was passed about a year and a half ago. Had a tremendous experience with that. Is perfectly in line with the Vision Franklin, the land use policy for the city, and we're very grateful for the elected officials and administrators that had helped us to make that happen. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Scott, and look forward to continuing our discussion tonight.
Great. Thanks, Dirk. Thanks for that introduction of Market Street and all the work you're doing. That's great stuff. Next today, we have Phil Fawcett with Boyle Development. Phil, along with his partner, Jeff Haynes, kind of served as pioneers themselves for the Boyle Investment Group out of Memphis, Tennessee. Phil and Jeff came here in 2001 to open the Boyle office and open in somewhat of a traditional manner with their portfolio, but they have now served as pioneers in our region of really taking on these mixed-use developments. They started really in earnest with that, with the Berry Farm down in south of Cool Springs. And then later on, as everybody knows about the Capitol View project, they are right in the heart of our downtown and have moved on to now a third large-scale mixed-use project. With their team, Phil leads their zoning, planning, and entitlement for all their projects. Sounds to me like a glutton for punishment, but Phil enjoys it and is really good at it and knows how to kind of tackle the different issues that do come up. His conversation, I think today will bring an immense amount of knowledge for what they have had to deal with throughout the process. So without any more chatter from me, Phil, take it away. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to focus today on 2 of our projects. The first one is Capitol View, which Scott mentioned, which is really building off the great success that Market Street and Dirk have done at the South Gulch. We're at the North Gulch, and then I'll focus on Berry Farms, which is a large-scale master plan community on the kind of southern gateway to Franklin. The first few slides of Capitol View, I'm just going to show you some aerials, kind of give you a location. This is right off the interstate at Charlotte Pike, terminating into 11th Avenue on the edge of downtown. And again, I think most people refer to this as the North Gulch. The next slide shows what the property looked like as we began to assemble this property with the help of Northwestern Mutual. There was significant number of properties that had to be combined to create this 35-acre parcel that we have ultimately redeveloped. And as you look at the next slide, you can see this is a rendering of what we envisioned the project to look like when we embarked on the redevelopment of this whole area. And currently it's 35 acres. It's planned for about 1.6 million of office, 200,000 square feet of retail, 450 hotel rooms, and almost 900 residential units. And we started on this project in 2012, 2013. And as you look at the next slide, I kind of talk about, the phasing that we've completed thus far. And you can see this is looking north. You can see, I don't know if you can read these, but the block A and B we've completed. Lifeway is at the northern part of the screen. Their building is completed. It says under construction, the Hampton Inn there, it's actually just opened. And then block E is finished. We're embarking on block F, which is going to be a multifamily project. We hope to start that in the spring. And then block B will be the last phase there, which would include another 500,000 foot office building and 300 hotel rooms. And the next slide just begins to kind of give you the character of what we've done there. And we really, there was great access and ingress and egress to the property, access to the interstate, but the infrastructure, as you saw from those previous slide, could not handle the kind of density that we wanted to put here. So we totally redid the road network, raised the grade, added the signal lights that are shown, worked with the city on a public-private partnership to add a park. So relocated all sorts of utility lines, buried electrical lines to make the visibility better. This is Capitol View. One of the restrictions that we have is there's a view corridor that we have to maintain to the Capitol, and you'll see some pictures of that as we go through this. And so then the next slides just begin to show the character of the project. And this is the site plan of the park. It is now open. Again, this was a public-private partnership with the city. I think it's a great amenity to the North Gulch and certainly a Capitol View. Next one, please. So what we try to do in our mixed-use developments is really make it a meaningful home for office, retail, and residential. And people have so many choices today. We want this to be their first choice. And you can see this is some of our corporate headquarters that have located at Capitol View. This is HCA's building where they house Parallon and Sarah Cannon. They also have Lifeway's new headquarters, and then HealthStream's headquarters is in the photograph in the bottom right. And then we have some residential shots here as you look at just the character of the residential that we've built to date, and we'll continue to build on the success we've had thus far. Just go ahead, the next couple there. So this is the amenity deck for our current residential project, and it's overlooking the Capitol as you stand out here at the pool with the volleyball court or whatever. It's just a dramatic view back towards downtown. And I thought this would be a good shot. This kind of shows the reworked streets, how we've brought the buildings close to the street, all new sidewalks, the new pavement, working with the city on what we call the Festival Street here, to be able to do the lights across the street, working with Public Works and the street department to make sure all of this could work. And it's been a great success thus far. Next slide then moves on to Berry Farms. You can go to the next one here just to give you an idea of where this is located. So this is at the Goose Creek I-65 interchange. It's the first interchange you get to if you're coming from the north from 840. So the southern gateway into Franklin. And as you can see from the numbers here, there's approximately 600 acres. We actually control 3/4 of the interchange here. There's approximately 1.5 million square feet of retail, 3 million feet of office, and 1,000 residential units. We're actually going through a densification now to add more residential because we are out of residential, and the residential has been significantly successful. So we're trying to build on that success. Next slide there. And so these are just some character shots of the development. These are all actually photos from the development. You know, we try to bring all the buildings up to the street, make it very pedestrian oriented, kind of bring the neighbors and the commercial together and activate all the streets here. So this is our residential. You can see then the retail on the next one, I believe. And then we get to the office. And again, on these office photographs here, you know, we've tried to really create a new submarket in Franklin, and we've been very blessed to bring Ramsey Solutions headquarters here, Lee Company's headquarters. There's a regional headquarters for Aetna. Tennessee Baptist Convention moved their headquarters here. And then insurance company called Truxas has moved their headquarters here. So, you know, this is a place people want to be, they want to work, they want to live, they want to shop. And we're continuing to kind of build on this as a new submarket for Franklin. So the next slides are just the site plans to give you a better idea of the overall scale of the project. We've kind of created 3 distinct districts here. The top left we call the town center, which we've built out the most. There's a more detailed site plan. After this, I'll get into a little bit more detail on the bottom left, or the southwest quadrant, we call Chadwell, which is where we're trying to potentially do some more density. And then the bottom right, or the southeast quadrant, is we call Reeves Fleming District. And that's where Ramsey and Aetna have located their headquarters at this point. And so the next slide is a more detailed site plan of what we call town center. This property is probably 70% built out at this point. All the residential is built out. The neighborhood commercial that's anchored by Publix is built out. We're probably 80% built out on the office section here, which is in blue. And we've just started an office building in the first phase of our True Town Center that we hope to deliver the office building in the spring of next year, and then the first phase of the town center in the fall of next year. And then we'll really start working on Chadwell next in earnest. So next slide. So this is just a summary slide to wrap things up. These are our kind of 5 large-scale mixed-use projects in Middle Tennessee, and they're all centered around the same thing, which is connecting the community together through the built environment. Back to you, Scott.
Great, thanks, Phil. That's really great, great information and great projects that you guys have delivered to our community. And it's interesting how you've spanned the market and really captured a unique experience in so many different locations. Thanks again for that presentation. Our last developer today is Brian Sewell. Brian currently serves as the president of Southern Land Company. I wanted Brian to round out this conversation from the developer's perspective, as Southern Land has broadened out beyond Middle Tennessee. They're now coast to coast. I sort of chuckle because that's a daunting task if you think about working in municipalities as varied as San Francisco, Las Vegas, Denver, and Long Island, along with the work that they do here in Middle Tennessee. And so I'm confident that Brian brings a unique perspective on the variety. I'm sure there's also a few things that he'd say are common repeats in all of those different locations. But I wanted him to speak last because he does bring a different perspective than just here in Middle Tennessee and the things that they deal with in going through approval for the development process for their project. So without any more rambling from me, Brian.
Thanks, Scott. And Phil, I hope you don't do more residential. You've been a healthy competitor for West Haven, and our hats off to what a great job you guys all do. So if Jacob, you want to flip over to the presentation, I'll get started. And so I'm going to kind of go from north, swing down through the south, and then end up with West Haven. And so I'll kind of touch on these briefly. These are not all the projects we're working on, but just a few that have some interesting aspects to them. The first one is our project in Garden City, which is really a village about a 30-minute train ride outside of Manhattan on Long Island. What's interesting about this one, it's a beautiful community, much like Franklin. And it was a 16-year zoning effort to get this approved. And it finally took the Justice Department having to sue the village of Garden City to incorporate housing that would become more available and affordable for the community. So upon the 16-year effort and the lawsuit, we were able to purchase the site about 2 years ago. And it'll be a great site, and especially as more of the migration heads out to Long Island. You can go to the next slide, please. Going into Philadelphia, if you've ever been to Philadelphia, they have some amazing squares that the founding fathers of that area put together. One of them is called Rittenhouse Square, and we purchased 0.8 acres. And for Dirks and Phil, it was $30 million for 0.8 acres, and it sat there empty for several decades. And we were able to secure the property, and it was a 3-year effort working with citizen groups, neighborhood groups, and historic communities. And it was just an amazing collaboration of getting input. And honestly, sometimes you look at input as distracting, and sometimes you look at it as collaborative. This one was very collaborative and really ended up with a phenomenal project. It includes an affordable housing component on the backside, and then on the main front portion of the building that you're seeing here is a 48-story tower and ground level retail and restaurants. And really the top half of the building will be for sale condominiums, and the bottom half will be for rent. And we have sold about 18 of the 54 units that will be built there. And we're at about the 5th floor of construction right now. Next slide. This is a project in Charleston, South Carolina in the Historic District. This was about a 4-year zoning effort, and was, I would say, intricate in terms of the detail that we had to go through for the Board of Architecture and Review, and a very, very challenging, but I think the project at the end of the day is going to be phenomenal. So down to the type of window grids, the type of stone, what kind of trees, the balcony sizes, it's a very, very intricate project, and we're pouring piers and foundations right now. Next slide. Moving into Texas, we've done several projects in the Plano, Dallas Metroplex, and this one is in Plano on a transit line, and it was a very collaborative process with the city of Plano. It's a public-private partnership where there were TIF dollars provided for providing parking for kind of the historic district, but also the project that we built here. So we've got underground parking and ground level retail, and again, it's right on a transit stop. So kind of pushing density, working with the city, and it really could not have been done without the TIF participation based on the cost of the project and the parking involved. Next slide, please. So going into Colorado, I was there yesterday. We've got 4 projects in the Denver, Boulder metropolitan area. This was, people hear about Boulder and the challenge of zoning, and it's much worse than what most people will tell you. It was, we had a moratorium thrown into the mix during the process. We had just a tremendous roller coaster of getting approvals, and just could never count on when you were told or given direction that once you follow that direction, that would be supported as you get through different parts of the city process. So kind of the inconsistency and the lack of definition, but ultimately we got it approved. And it's under construction now, will be completed in March, April of next year. Next slide, please. I think it's just another picture. It's office, multifamily, retail. And across the street is a Google regional office location. And while we were getting this zoned, we actually pre-sold the entire campus of office to Google. And so it's under construction for Google, and we'll finish and close in the spring of next year. Next slide, Jacob. So in Denver, this was a project that we had planned for about 3 to 4 stories of stick frame construction. And if you see on the corner, there's a really pretty old building, a 2-story tavern. It's actually not a historic structure, but it was a neighborhood favorite for the community. And as we had the demolition permit and the opportunity to start construction, had a lot of residents say, could we please try to figure out how to save this structure, even though it wasn't historic, but it is a beautiful building. And in working with the community, we kind of exchanged density for preservation, not exchanged it, but we incorporated density while preserving that building. So that will remain. We built around it and underneath it and on top of it. And I was there yesterday. We're starting pre-leasing and signed our first lease for the apartments, and all of the retail and restaurant is completely rented at this point. Next slide. So this is a project called Auric. It's in Las Vegas, and maybe if you go to the next slide, Jacob, I can kind of give you the master plan bird's eye view. This is our first experience in opportunity zones. If you've heard about kind of what was enacted for revitalization of certain areas, this is an area that is close to the original kind of downtown Las Vegas. Most of the growth has occurred on the Strip, and the activity and the development activity has been on the Strip, and kind of left downtown Vegas kind of behind in terms of development and activity. So the city, in a real concentrated effort, worked with the government and identified it as an opportunity zone, and really started bringing in some great uses for the facility. And so we came in and are under construction and will deliver early next year for several hundred apartments, some ground level retail, and then we purchased 2 additional sites in the area as well. So just to kind of make an accent on this one, the partnership with the city of Las Vegas, when they got behind this, it took their support at every turn to get this done, because so many little things would get in the way of being able to move things forward. And they had a dedicated person for this project in the city that would help us navigate through getting through some of those challenges. And without that support from the council and the mayor and the identified person, it would have been a much different outcome in terms of time and how to bring it to market. So the next slide is a project that we are just getting started on. We could spend all day talking about it. It was a naval base that was commissioned in 1850 by Millard Fillmore, and it was the base that was probably one of the most active, production of ships and submarines and repairs to submarines. And over time, the decommissioning of the base occurred in 1980. They sold it to Lennar Home Building, and Lennar had it for the past 25 years. And a local investor here in Nashville, through his travels to the Bay Area, got enamored with the island, bought the island, and asked us to come in and partner with him. And it is one of the more complicated projects that I think might be going on in the country right now, mainly from the transportation perspective. There's a really interesting and thorough approach to density approvals and transportation from automobiles. They're really de-emphasizing automobiles. How can they incorporate rideshare? How can they incorporate community hubs within the island to facilitate kind of de-emphasizing the automobile? There's ferry service, there's bus service, there's scooters that they want to encourage. And so we're just on the beginning stages of working through the transportation and planning solutions for a project this big. So it's kind of a trip around the country, kind of bringing it back to West Haven. Jacob, if you could go to that slide. I'm sorry, I skipped over Green Hills, where I'm sitting currently. We built this project several years ago. It is a mixed-use project, ground level retail, second floor retail, and third and fourth floor office. And then there's a motor court and a approximately 300 unit multifamily tower in the back. And then if you go to the next slide, Jacob, West Haven, I like Phil, came about 20 years ago when this was raw land and joined the company to take on this community with our team here. And it's just been an amazing process to go through. And I'll end on a couple takeaways from our experience, especially as I kind of just went around the country. The city of Franklin, the zoning process is very thorough. It is very challenging. It's very rigorous, as it should be. And it's not unlike other places in terms of getting things approved. But our experience is once it gets through the zoning process and you begin processing for development plans for sections and parcels, comparative to other cities, I would say the city of Franklin's process works pretty well. And so in the context of the other projects and the other cities, the city of Franklin's process works very well. And this is not anything to say it's easy, but it does work well. Another observation is, I guess, for this region, I think transportation seems to need to catch up to the amount of growth that is coming. And Scott, I think that's a part of some of the conversation. How do we plan for the growth for this entire area that's coming? And it's not just more roads. And how do we get transportation included in the conversations, not just for a project like Berry Farms and West Haven and the larger projects, but how do all projects become a part of the solution? And then lastly, I think we would all say that changing of regulations when you have a large project, it impacts what you kind of need to count on as you go forward. So it's a double-edged sword. You need flexibility, but you also need to be able to count on the things that go into making a project this size, the roads and the widths and the lot sizes and the infrastructure that accommodates these projects. So with that, I'll wrap my comments up.
Great. Brian, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who's spoken today so far. And one thing, Brian, I would like to say to you is, because I do live in Franklin, and hats off and congratulations on the opening, cross my fingers, of Mac Hatcher Extension in November, towards the end of this year. I get to watch that construction on a daily basis right outside my front door. So looking forward to that, which has been 20 years, or actually, as my wife would tell me, 40 years in the making for Mac Hatcher to make it all the way around. So lastly, in our speaker panel today, we have Jeff Tyndall. And Jeff's experience as a planner spans 21 years in both public and private sector service. In March of 2018, he was selected to be the director of the Clarksville-Montgomery County Regional Planning Commission. Jeff has served as speaker for us last year at the Power of 10 and brings so much insightful knowledge on how to get through the process and how to really tackle large-scale projects like this. So without any more jabber from me, Jeff, thanks.
Good morning. Thank you, Scott. I guess I'll apologize right off the bat. I don't have any flashy slides or nice renderings of projects. It's not exactly what we do here. Sort of look at us as partners with these different development companies. We need to work with projects as they come along. And I believe it's the planner's job, not just only to uphold the code, but to walk them through the process. Oftentimes here in Clarksville, Montgomery County, we're dealing with some local developers 90% of the time. But as the previous three speakers all mentioned, they've worked in other parts of the country, and sometimes you're walking into uncharted territory. And you may realize, when you're working in New York or California, you're into CEQA for the first time, and you need the local planners to help you go through that process. And I don't think we should be necessarily gatekeepers, but also guides through that process. Some of the early takeaways, as I heard the first speakers talk here, a lot of these projects were greenfield or brownfield, working almost with a blank slate. That's always the easiest thing to work with, when you can either take an entire city block or 60 to 100 acres of farm and work with it. You know, you have to work around some of the local road projects and some of the local regulations around that. But when you have a larger piece or a brownfield piece where you say, look, I'm doing this whole thing, a little easier to work on. I'm sure you have to go through some bulk regulations and try to get the density you want that works with the local communities. And that's where I think, some of these projects, as Brian mentioned, 13 years in one of these cities and 4 years in another just to get through the process. I'd also say that a lot of the projects we just saw kind of wrote themselves. Those markets are hot. Those are areas people want to be. They're areas that need housing, and we know what's going on with housing right now. But they all have a very similar vein of sprawl retrofit and infill development. And I think that's really where local development, both cities and counties, need to start focusing their efforts immediately. We have a lot of land available, but is it land that we already have utilities on? Is it land where the roads have capacity versus the ones that don't have capacity? And what are we doing with the old strip malls, parking lots? And I was very encouraged by that first project in Franklin, taking 50 acres of parking and doing something with it. I had a professor back in my time at Rutgers that said parking was the best land banking mechanism we ever invented. So that's what you got there. As I was sitting on the Peloton last night, I was riding the Peloton. I wasn't just sitting on it, but the instructor brought up a great quote, and I had to write it down as soon as we were done. He said, whatever you're not changing, you are choosing. And I think that's an important message to our local cities and counties here in Middle Tennessee is even though things are growing fast right now, and we're seeing record growth in a lot of our smaller cities and counties throughout Middle Tennessee, what are you choosing? Your rules in the end get to what, unless you have one of these previous types of developers that come in with it and roll it out on the table and say, like, how do we get this done? Generally, development just chugs along at the rate of your zoning ordinance or your subdivision regulations. And are you getting what your desired, what your community desires? We always say not all growth is good growth. I think a lot of the planning staffs and some public servants out there, we have maybe a 10 or 20 year view of the future. Our planning commissions, sometimes 5 or 10 years in the future. And the elected officials, sometimes that's only 1 or 2 years or in the current election cycle. And that's not a dig on them. And that's how they're elected. But we need to look at what the future might be versus immediate return on investment. And sometimes saying no is okay and holding out for what you want for your betterment of your community. Also think as public servants, we all need to be involved. We don't just need to be behind the desk and just hope that these things come to our community. We either need to be out there actively recruiting, or we need to be out there telling our story to our local partners. Here at this planning commission a couple times a year, and unfortunately it's been on ice the last 6 months, but last year we went out to 4 or 5 different real estate brokerages where we got to talk to 40 to 60 realtors at a time, tell the story of the planning commission, let them learn a little more. So when they're showing houses in neighborhoods, they can tell the right story. They can talk about that land back there may get developed. It's not open space. And how do you tell that in the right way? So that's always good for us to get out and share that with the home builders, the engineers and such. I think planning commissions and city departments need to be agile and flexible. I know changing rules is difficult, and we're going through some of it right now in Clarksville. Either requires a lot of public hearing, multiple public votes by the city council, and it can take 3 or 4 months just to get to that process, and then 3 or 4 more months just to get a couple of sentences changed. But I'd encourage you all to be agile and flexible. I came from down in Chattanooga. I didn't work for them, but I lived down there, and their planning commission on a monthly basis has multiple code changes, and it's sections at a time. They don't try to do it all overhaul. They're doing little bits. And if it gets held up this month and deferred, well, it's on the agenda for next month. But they're bringing in multiple changes all the time. And I think that's a great approach to looking at your code. I think as planners, we need to try to find a way to get to yes. especially when the project benefits the community. I don't think you need to break the rules, but I think, again, back to being that guide through the process. It helps to be able to get to yes, whether that's through the variance processes or asking for map amendments or zoning changes. So finally, you need these developers to implement your plan. And I think that's the interesting dichotomy here is the local communities make the master plans, they make the growth plans, but you need the development community to implement that plan. The government's not out there building these projects. We're laying the groundwork for these projects. And what does your plan say? And I'm sure 20 and 30 years ago, some of these cities did not have plans for what they're seeing today. So what are we doing today to plan for the next 20 years that these type of projects may be a real, or even something we haven't even dreamed up yet, realistic in 20 or 30 years? And again, I think being agile and flexible is important to that. And my sort of last set of points here. So updating your plans, it's important. I know right now, I'll pause there. I heard it said in a couple webinars that we've had the benefit of going to this summer with COVID. It's been a good advantage to go to these webinars. Someone said, don't look at a city's plans to understand their priorities, look at their budgets. And I just ask our local communities here in Middle Tennessee, what is your budget expenditures? And are you at least addressing what's in your plans with your budget expenditures? Or is it going against it or hindering what's in your plans? And it just doesn't mean your land use plan. I'm sure other communities have strategic plans and parks and rec plans and other things, but where the rubber hits the road is the budget, and what is your priorities are in your budget. I know slow times are great for updating your plans in the US, especially Middle Tennessee and much of the South. We're in a historic housing shortage right now, and it's just booming. But even amidst this pandemic, but low interest rates coupled with the current wave of urban exodus have small and medium-sized cities and counties booming. So even though it's not a good time in terms of hours and availability, I think this is the time we really need to be adjusting our plans and be, again, agile. It's a great time to be a planner. I can go on the internet and do research and look at other communities. I can pick up the phone. We can even get on webinars nowadays and talk. What have other communities done? Don't reinvent the wheel, or at least if you're going to reinvent the wheel, maybe accelerate it a couple of years and try to skip a couple of the other stumbling blocks that other cities had in the meantime. And again, back to my example with Chattanooga and Hamilton County, if you don't have time for a full overhaul update, we were going to try that here this year. And unfortunately, getting $100,000 to $200,000 added to your budget was not going to be a possibility come budget time in July. But can you do small, meaningful changes? Go for that low-hanging fruit and keep working on your plan continually. It shouldn't just be a snapshot in time, but it should be a living document. And finally, planning commissions. This is out for all of you out there. I think we have a lot of power in our subdivision regulations instead of the plans and the zoning regulations. In Tennessee, it just takes planning commission action to pass a subdivision regulation change. And as you saw, even with those projects today, our single family subdivisions take up the most land use for the least density. So I think there's a lot of changes, even if they're small changes, 10, 20% increase in either density, reduction in rights of way or open space, or however your town works with those. I think there's a lot of headway we can all make in our subdivision regulations relatively quickly. And I have a little story later I think Scott's going to go over with us is how to make those changes, work with your fellow city and county counterparts and departments. And don't be afraid to make a bad decision. Just don't make a terrible decision, I guess, and be ready to adjust course if you need to. Back to you, Scott.
Great. Jeff, thank you so much. It's so insightful to hear from a planner and thinking about kind of what we can do to try to address the items that have come up. So again, thanks to everybody for joining us today, and thanks to all our guests for their presentation. Now I want to move to the second half of our conversation today. And originally I was going to start out by highlighting a few of the topics, but we've had some questions come in, and these questions I think will gear us right into that. So I want to start with Phil. I don't know if you maybe planted this question because it came to something that you brought up earlier, and it was, what's the effects of COVID that you've seen? And I know that you had touched on that in our pre-show for this call today. You want to touch on that a little bit and how COVID has impacted what you guys are working on and how that affects your planning process and what you have to do to get through the planning process to deal with impacts from COVID?
Well, I don't know that we have enough time to talk about the impacts of COVID, but I'll start with the planning and some of the obvious things that I think everybody has experienced one way or the other. The move to the internet for purchasing goods and services is having a huge impact on how we're beginning to plan new projects, whether that's on an individual project like a multifamily, where simply the volume of packages that may be coming in now compared to pre-COVID. How do you deal with that? That's on a small scale. On the office side, I would say the bigger the user, the slower they are to come back to the office. And all the conversations now with the big corporate headquarters is how can they reduce their square footage? What's their head count going to be in the future? How many people are going to be able to work from home on a permanent basis? So there's a lot of discussion going on around that. So how's that going to affect the use of office in the future? Not only is our existing buildings, but the ones that we're planning. And then on the retail side, just because of the significant move to the internet that's, I think, accelerated through COVID, I think we're going to see big box development really slow down. I think the only big box users that are really doing well are those that are providing necessities, the grocery stores, the hardware stores like Home Depot and Lowe's, and the Walmarts of the world, Target, those type of people. So the apparel stores, there's a running list of people who have filed bankruptcy over the last couple of months. So we have to have the flexibility in our planning process to address this new market that we're going to be in. And that's at every level, retail, office, and residential. Because I don't think, who knows how many of these changes are permanent and how many of them are temporary. We have an office building under construction at Berry Farms. We've gone to all touchless entries, everything touchless in the bathrooms. We've changed up our delivery system. We've changed our mechanical system, heating and ventilation. We've changed to kind of meet this new market. That's just on one project. So it not only affects the planning and how we address what the new services are going to be, but it also affects the architecture and delivering these new buildings. So it's significant.
Hey, Scott, could I tag on to what Phil was saying and agree with him completely? I would also tell you the volume of people coming in to West Haven, just in particular, from New York, California, Chicago, Minnesota, Wisconsin, it was noticeable before. It is absolutely overwhelming at this point, the traffic and buyers that are coming down here. I don't think it's a short-term issue. I think Nashville was popular before, and this greater MSA was popular. I think it's going to become even more popular for a good while, which I think goes back to one of my comments. I really think transportation is going to have to be prepared for not just a short-term COVID bump. I think it's going to be a long-term migration into this area.
Brian, I think that's right. And, the biggest takeaway we've seen so far is just the acceleration of trends that had already been occurring. Just to give you an example, Nashville's hot, it's going to get hotter. Office space, we've all had the technology to work from home for years and just, hadn't really embraced it. Now we're figuring out how it works and discerning whether, that's the right call for various companies. Like Phil said, online sales are going to accelerate, bricks and mortar, are going to have to reinvent themselves, pivot to be able to take care of, what customers are wanting and needing. Right now, as a company, we're focused on, trying to separate the urgent from the important a little bit. And the urgent right now is people have to feel safe engaging in the product and the projects that we have. So, our office tenants, our residents, our customers, just like the other companies, we're doing everything we can to let people know that it's okay to come in and to work, to share an apartment with 300 other neighbors. That's going to be the thing that is going to be most critical for us as an industry coming into this. And then of course, all these trends that you're reading about, all these webinars about what's going to happen in the future, that's going to play out over a long period of time, because commercial real estate in particular is kind of a lagging indicator. Offices sign long-term leases, and they're going to take some time to discern exactly how they're going to handle their density and occupancy and where they want to be. So that's going to unfold over time. But right now we're just doing what we can and seeing how everything unfolds.
Right. That's great discussion amongst everybody. And what's interesting is you were able to touch on a few of the questions that have come up. Another set of questions, I want to give Jeff a moment to speak to this. And I'm not sure how much, Jeff, y'all have gotten into the conversation about public transit, but as we start to grow as a region, there's going to be a lot of cross commuting from, like you had mentioned earlier, about people moving to Clarksville. There's going to be a lot more commuting back and forth between Clarksville and Nashville. Obviously, I'll tell you, this is a personal injection in this conversation. I see we've talked about mass transit for a long time, but it almost seems like we were talking about the wrong aspect of the chicken and egg. We're always talking about putting this infrastructure in, and it almost seems like what we need to do instead is create the destinations, allow them to densify, to create the demand for the mass transit, and then bring that along to support that density. Can you speak to anything y'all are doing there in Clarksville as it relates to mass transit and multimodal transportation?
Sure, Scott. I'll talk about it from two aspects. The first would be Clarksville's location to Nashville. We are a separate metro from them, separate MSA, but there's a lot of ties. We are only 40 minutes up the road, 45 on a rough day often, but it just takes one thing on I-24 to really mess that up. We have seen an increase in the traffic going down to Nashville, even in just the last 6 months. I think a lot of folks with the looming property tax increase and sort of that urban exodus I'd mentioned, which isn't just for Nashville, but a lot of our urban areas are probably going to see a little slowdown here over the year, I believe. You're trading a couple more minute commute for a little cheaper way of life and maybe a little more land. And I think that's why you've seen us and especially Rutherford County, even Robertson County, we're booming. Our building permits for Montgomery County are up 37% this first 6 months of this year versus the 6 months last year. So it's no secret there. And I was surprised to see that we'd even passed Williamson County in terms of total building permits for this year. We're now third behind Metro and Rutherford County. So the growth around the region is definitely fueled a lot by Nashville. I do believe we do need to act as a region. When it comes to transit, I think it's the way we treat transit is the way TDOT sometimes treats road projects. We need to get full first before we start then figuring out how to get ourselves out of it. There's not a lot of pre-planning when it comes to doing road projects, whether we're going from 2 lanes to 3 to 5 in some of those pinch points. I'm not a huge fan of just widening roads to widen them, but there are areas in our city and other areas in the region that are pinch points. We need to address those by either widening them or creating alternative routes to get people where they need to go. So with transit here in Clarksville, my long-term view for what we need to do is start creating those nodes of activity. I think someone said community hubs. I'm going to steal that. I like that term as well. But give people a reason to not necessarily go car free, but reduce your car travel. Can I replace a 10-mile trip to the center of our commerce area on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard with a half the mile, half the minute trip to your local area for the same need? And that's going to be a long-term goal for us, but there's a lot of things that go into that. Now, as far as commuting down to Nashville, we do have commuter bus travel right now out of Clarksville. I don't know exactly how many go down a day, but in talking to our local MPO, first you got to fill those buses up. Then you got to have several dozen of those buses a day going down full, then you might start talking about something else, whether it's bus lanes, bus rapid transit, or even the long-term vision for here is a train line from Clarksville down to Nashville. And then once you get there, how do you get the folks from the train station that last mile to where they really want to be at their desk or at their business? And these are things we're going to have to talk about together. I think at the Tennessee APA last year, there was a great presentation from someone at Nissan talking about the idea that one day you won't own a car, you'll own a share of a car, and that car will get you from here to this point. It'll tell you where to park. Then you'll hop on this either bus or train. Then you'll get somewhere. There'll be another car waiting for you to get to the last bit. And with the power of our phones and the internet, that'll become more of a reality in the future too. Is this multi methods of getting to the same place?
Thank you so much, Jeff. And then I'd like to ask sort of the opposite question. Phil, you had mentioned that you guys are looking to add some more residential component to your development. In my mind, without being involved, it seems like that would be stemming from the fact that you've got these office buildings and other, destinations that residents can actually, instead of talking about mass transit going from here to Nashville or here to Clarksville, what you guys are really promoting is staying within the village and being able to live, work, play, and conduct as much of your daily activities within one place as possible. Can you speak a little bit about that and what y'all's goal is with increasing the residential in your development?
Well, thanks, Scott. You're exactly right. I think it's also, it's really two things. It's continuing to build upon the trend of people want to live close to where they work. They want to shop close to where they live. And all of those build upon each other to create a community that is just really hard to replicate. And as we've looked at our portfolio, kind of back to this COVID question, where we've had the most success in our commercial is where we've had a significant amount of residential, because a lot of people, Berry Farms is probably one of the top performing assets that we have, because so many of the people who may have been commuting to Nashville or Cool Springs are working from home in that area. So our retail there didn't really miss much. And so I think it also helps you buttress the ups and downs in the market to really build upon the residential density within these commercial nodes. It significantly helps the traffic patterns, where you can capture so many of those trips internally versus externally. And I think the quality of life that you're offering people, especially as we see what's already mentioned is kind of de-urbanization from these big markets like Chicago and New York. They're used to a certain amount of amenities, and they're going to gravitate to those kind of amenitized projects first, and to be able to kind of handle that new demand that's coming, but not overload kind of the existing infrastructure. I think taking advantage of where the infrastructure already is, maybe improving upon it, is going to be the better way to kind of develop out some of these areas. Yeah,
absolutely. And speaking of infrastructure, Dirk, I want to give you a moment to ask you about where you guys may have run into. I know I've run into it personally, actually, on a project with Reagan Smith, of trying to develop a very road engaged building design, and found that all my infrastructure was in the way, that I had to set my building so far back just to avoid that. Dirk, I know you had mentioned that. Can you speak to that a little bit of what you guys have run into there in the Gulch with, or on other projects with that component, and what we may kind of see as opportunities to address that in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been actually through, Scott, as you are aware, 3 or 4 iterations of, quote unquote, infrastructure right-of-way design in the Gulch neighborhood since, the late 1990s. 11th Avenue Industrial Boulevard was not literally, but, pretty much a 50-mile-an-hour zone straight through the neighborhood. And, through the master planning process and collaboration with the city, we're able to curve that road, reduce the speed, really, kind of give the pedestrians a chance down here. And that's been successful, but it takes a lot of work, and it has been a very intensive collaboration between us, all the city departments, and then the utility providers that bring all the services to all the buildings. The right of ways in the downtown area are very constrained. But what the challenge you run into is when you're engaging and embracing the street with your ground floor uses in your buildings. You want to have outdoor dining, you want to have storefront entrances. All that is conflicting a lot of times with what has to go underground. And I think that what we've taken away from is that urban planning standards and right-of-way standards evolve over time. 4 or 5 years ago, we turned 11th Avenue with the city into what they call a complete street that has, bioretention and reduced stormwater impacts. With that, you've got bike lanes you've got to incorporate. You've got tree wells of different sizes than you used to have, and so that was really an instructive experience to say, okay, well, how can we respond to what we're doing here after you've actually had a lot of buildings on both sides of the street already completed. So it's been really interesting. I think there's some takeaways that we in the business can use with this. One of the things that we're applying, hopefully, into our Eastworks project in Cool Springs is, really working with the city to say, in order to give the pedestrians a chance, can we entertain, narrower lanes for roads, down to 10 or 11 feet, really trying to, have the crosswalks, come into the right of way, and, providing features that are really, the pedestrian is more comfortable than the automobile driver coming through these mixed use neighborhoods the way it should be. And so, I think, and I know that, Boyle, Sutherland, they have the same priorities for what they're looking for in their developments, because that creates the type of environment that people want to engage with. They want to park their car once, they want to walk to all the stuff they want to do. And if we can promote that and utilize our infrastructure and right-of-way standards to promote that type of environment that satisfies our customers, then we have a chance of being successful.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And then Brian, question for you that came up, and I think you touched on this a little bit in your presentation. One of the planners out there is asking, what can cities do to help forge partnerships with developments to help make these a reality? And I'll tell you from my own personal standpoint, that could be in TIF or infrastructure improvements or various design things. But can you speak to what cities and municipalities can do to partner with the developers to help promote these projects and get them to the finish line?
Sure. And that's a really important factor that we've seen in different places. I think having somebody that can help you navigate through the process of what the challenges are that you're facing. And a lot of times you kind of have to go from department to department, and the information might be a bit conflicting or inconsistent, and getting some resolution when the things conflict. And sometimes you just need a point person, not to give you what you want, but to help at least get an answer. So we've found in some of these projects and other places that when there's a point person, a dedicated developer liaison, I'm not sure what the position title would be, but kind of a liaison to get through a system of inconsistencies in terms of interpretation. And so I think just having a point of contact and somebody that can help you navigate through the complexity of some of these projects would be something that we've seen elsewhere. I could name the people in Plano and Las Vegas and Charleston that when we had issues that we just needed somebody to help us answer, we could go to them, and might not always be the right answer or the answer that we want, but they at least could help us bring it to a head for a decision.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Brian. And I'll add to that also. I know from the developments that we've done, in some jurisdictions, the rents just aren't there for the multifamily components that cities want to have to sort of support the growth that's happening around there. And it sometimes requires some financial incentives from the city. and through TIF structures, long-term tax abatements, cities can do that without having a real impact to their bottom line, especially if it's similar to the lands that both Phil and Dirk dealt with in the Gulch. If you look at what it was providing from a tax revenue standpoint prior to their development, it could certainly justify a percentage of tax relief over a 20 or 30-year cycle to really help those developments happen and encourage those. So I want to provide that answer to the question that came. And then there's been a lot of questions about mass transit. And I would see that more Dirk's project in the Gulch and Phil's project. Are you guys, I'll let Dirk speak first. Dirk, are you out, I guess, in support of the mayor's new transit plan? And then my question for Phil will be the Greenway extension. Are you guys doing any collaboration on that? So Dirk, if you could speak to the mayor's plan on the mass transit program.
I think it's great that we as a community are in a position to talk about, new investment in transit, even in the middle of everything that's going on. Like, the administration is actually focusing on that and treating that as a priority among all the other things that are happening in Metro. I think it is true that, one of the challenges that, the previous referendum had a couple of years ago was, it simply wasn't a regional solution, right? And exactly what Jeff is talking about, we've got this kind of hub and spoke network of pikes that are coming into, Nashville. We've got to be engaging in, responding to the needs of people in these other communities that are surrounding Nashville and really have a metropolitan approach to the growth. It's really interesting to me that, when you look at some of the major markets that we kind of use as case studies, you've got, the coastal cities that have had transit forever, were built around transit. One of the biggest challenges they're having right now is not necessarily, the safety of their employees coming back into the physical workspace. It's the perceived safety of the employees getting back on a train or a subway or a bus right now. For better or worse, Nashville as a market is not burdened by those challenges right now. We kind of have a clean slate. And so I think that we do have an opportunity on a going forward basis with Metro's new plan or anything that's similar to it to really kind of rewrite the script and figure out, okay, well, where are the transportation nodes and, where are people wanting to go with this and really treat it from a little bit of a fresh perspective that we haven't had the opportunity to do before. So I'm really encouraged by that.
Great. And Phil, can you speak to you guys' involvement with the Greenway extension? And I know that's been headed your way there at Capitol View.
Yeah, and we're big believers in transit. One of the unique things about Boyle is we don't really sell properties very often. So we're thinking about how to position our projects and how to handle this issue, 20, 30 years out. And although you would say Greenway doesn't really answer that, but especially in an urban district and even in, Eastworks, where you've got the density where people want the opportunity to bike or walk or use Uber and Lyft, all these different types of transportation other than just getting in your car, parking it and leaving. I think the Greenway, it offers so much. It's not just a transportation method, but it creates this quality of life that people are looking for. And so at Capitol View, we were very excited about extending the Greenway through Capitol View, working with the city on the land that we donated for the park, extending the Greenway through that park so that it can then ultimately connect back down to the river. And I think that just opens up so many possibilities for transit, but it also creates, a desirable kind of development network where people want to be on that Greenway or transit stop or whatever it may be, that you really have to create the density around there to support it. So we funded all of the Greenway ourselves, and we maintain it ourselves. With a management agreement with the city, but we have dedicated that Greenway through our property to the city at this point.
Hey, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Could I just kind of tack on to this since we're talking about transportation, greenways, and rail? I
Please.
find it interesting that I think some of the planners and the municipalities should be taken into consideration. So a project like West Haven, we had no Amazon, we had no package delivery service and retail shopping back when we started. And now we're seeing opportunities working with some of those larger companies to be able to put nodes within the community where they can drop in a automated delivery box and then an electronic robot, so to speak, or vehicle takes the package from the node to the home and takes a lot of the running around the neighborhoods by trucks and travel. And so I think that should be taken into account as part of transportation, little things like that, not just bigger transportation things.
Wow, Brian, that is a great point and an interesting segue to what I was about to tee up to Jeff, and that is, as we're moving into this new age of design and city planning, and I think somebody else mentioned it earlier that it was over 10 years ago when the city of Nashville introduced its first form-based code sub area, and I wanted to ask Jeff. Obviously, education is a big deal. And going to what Brian said, technology is changing so frequently. It requires a lot of agility. And I didn't really intend to make this plug, but I'll go ahead and say it. There's a YouTuber out there the program is called City Beautiful. And I've watched several of their videos and been fascinated how they've been able to encapsulate these very complex issues into videos that are between 4 and 5, and there have been some as big as 30 minutes, but roughly usually about 12 to 14 minutes. And they touch on the very detailed and complicated issues that we're talking about here. But besides watching videos on YouTube, Jeff, is there a few things that you would recommend we kind of touch on? I mean, obviously education is a big thing that you could talk to about what we could do to help facilitate more conversations like this and getting us to more progressive ways of dealing with development like this.
That's we could probably spend a whole nother hour, I think, on how technology is going to change everything. And I wish I had that crystal ball. I think we'd all be better off, for the future. I do want to thank you, Scott, for turning me on to that podcast on YouTube, City Beautiful. It's a good little bite size. I usually watch one at lunch a couple times a week if I can. And they had a great one for anyone who's still kind of new to planning. Is a 15 minutes on the history of urban planning all the way from, I think, 1600s to today, and how a lot of federal policies got us to where we are today. So sometimes I feel like we're undoing a lot of damage that's been done, especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But then how do we poise ourselves so that we're available going forward to embrace this technology? You know, what Brian said about those little robots, that's the first thing I've heard about that. But then I think about what are the added, do we need wider sidewalks? Do we need different kind of right of ways? Are there different paths? I mean, they're robots, not people. They could be going through tunnels for all we know, and just try to think these things out. But it really requires getting all the partners to the table, because once you start talking about changing sidewalks or changing rights of way, as mentioned today, you're talking about street departments, the departments of public works, gas or water, electric, and everyone's got their own piece of the pie that they need and they want. And then it's, well, where's the conflict? You know, who's the one that needs the widest width? And then you say, okay, I don't think it's bad to question it. Why do you need the widest width? You know, can you deal with 6 feet instead of 8 feet? Or can we stack these things? Or are there other ways we can look at this? Can we put these behind buildings? And I think a lot of us as public servants sometimes get in our ways and get used to the way we're doing things, because we are so busy, and a lot of us are understaffed, and it's easier just to say that's the rule. But I think we all need to take some time. And again, that time is really when it slows down, but I don't think that's happening for the next 2 or 3 years at the rate we're going right now. So just be ready to get those people around the table. I think every planner should have that mental Rolodex of who needs to be around the table when someone comes to the city, or the chief of staff or the mayor. You know, whoever that first point of contact is when something like that comes up should have that group of people that they can call quickly and get around the table to talk about it.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. Those are great comments. And to extend the thanks and appreciation, we're getting close to the end of our session. I want to thanks again to all of our panelists today. Jeff Tyndall with the City of Clarksville, Montgomery County, Phil Fawcett with Boyle Development, Dirk Melton with Market Street Equities, and Brian Sewell with Southern Land Company. I also want to take a special moment to thank our sponsors today for today's conversation, Reagan Smith and Smith G Studios, along with all the speakers you see here listed who have really been essential in the life of Cumberland Region tomorrow. So with that, I will conclude today's conversation. Again, thanks to everybody for joining us. This has been a great dialogue and hopefully very insightful and useful for the people that watched. Thanks again. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, Scott.